In 1945, in the last weeks of the Second World War, a convoy of trucks wound its way through the Austrian Alps under SS Guard. When the war ended days later, crates from those trucks were hauled out of a lake called Toplitz, and inside them, investigators found money. British money, £5 notes, £10 notes, 20s and 50s, in quantities that made no sense. When the Bank of England examined them, the verdict was worse than anyone had imagined. They were perfect. What lay at the bottom of that Alpine lake was the largest counterfeiting operation in the history of money. 134 million pounds of forged sterling, billions in today's money, manufactured by the Nazi state with a single purpose: not to spend. To destroy. The plan was to rain banknotes over Britain until the pound itself collapsed, and with it, the country's ability to fight. This is the story of Operation Bernhard, the secret factory inside a concentration camp, the prisoners who forged for their lives, the notes so flawless the Bank of England itself could not tell them from its own, and the quiet, decades-long cover-up that followed, because the most dangerous attack on Britain in the Second World War was not aimed at its cities. It was aimed at its money. To understand why a forged banknote could be a weapon of war, you have to understand what a banknote actually is. And what it is a promise. A £5 note in 1939 was not worth £5 of anything. It was a piece of paper on which the Bank of England promised to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £5. The entire machinery of British commerce, wages, savings, trade across the empire, ran on the belief that the promise was good and the paper was real. And that belief was the target. Flood a country with notes it cannot tell from its own, and every transaction becomes a question. Shopkeepers hesitate, banks refuse. Savings become suspect. Money only works while nobody has to think about it. And the moment everyone has to think about it, it stops working entirely. Run the arithmetic of the attack, and its ambition comes into focus. Britain's entire war effort ran on confidence in sterling. The loans that built the bombers, the imports that fed the island, the empire's trade, all of it denominated in the promise. The planners reckoned that even a partial success would force Britain into an impossible choice: honor every note presented, genuine or not, and bleed, or refuse suspect notes and teach every citizen that the money in their own pocket might be worthless. The first option cost treasure. The second cost the thing treasure stands on. There was no third option, which is what made a printing press, in this one specific application, a strategic weapon in the same class as a bomber fleet, at 1,000th of the price. They even war-gamed the delivery. The aircraft chosen for the drops were assessed, the bundle sizes tested, the release altitudes debated, notes scattered differently from bombs, and a bale that lands unopened in a field defeats the purpose. The plan called for the notes to fall over the industrial north and the countryside, where a farm labourer finding a fiver in a hedgerow, a week's wages blown in on the wind, would face a temptation the planners considered no rationing era Britain could resist. They were probably right. The weapon was never fired, but no one has ever seriously argued it was badly aimed. The Germans understood this perfectly, because it had happened to them. In 1923, Germany's own currency had died of a different disease, hyperinflation, and the men who watched wheelbarrows of marks buy a single loaf of bread never forgot what a country looks like when its money fails. Now, they intended to inflict that failure on their enemy, deliberately, from the air. The idea surfaced within weeks of the war beginning. In September 1939, a meeting in Berlin's finance ministry heard a proposal of elegant brutality: forge the pound sterling on an industrial scale, drop it from aircraft over Britain, and let greed do the rest. People would pick the notes up. Of course they would, and every note spent would push the poison deeper into the bloodstream of British commerce. There were objections, and they are revealing. The head of the Reichsbank protested, not on moral grounds, but professional ones. Counterfeiting another nation's currency was an attack on the idea of money itself, and Germany's own money lived in the same glass house. He was overruled. The economists calculated that if even a fraction of the forged notes entered circulation, British prices would surge, the pound's exchange rate would buckle, and, the detail they savoured most, every genuine note would become suspect. The forgery did not need to replace the pound. It only needed to make the pound doubt itself. The plan acquired a name, a budget, and a patron in the SS. What it needed was the impossible, a perfect copy of the hardest banknote on earth to forge. The first attempt was a fiasco worth pausing on, because its failure explains everything the second attempt did differently. Operation Andreas, launched in 1940, was staffed the conventional way, with loyal technicians, civil servants, and printing engineers recruited for their politics as much as their craft. They worked for 2 years in a Berlin workshop, and they produced notes that were good. Good was worthless. The paper never felt right, the watermark never held its subtlety, and the operation dissolved in bureaucratic squabbling with almost nothing usable to show. The lesson the SS drew was cold and correct. Patriots could not do this work. Craftsmen could, and the greatest craftsmen available were the ones the Reich had imprisoned. There was also the question of the paper itself, and it nearly defeated them twice. British notepaper was linen rag, but not any linen. The Germans eventually concluded the British used Rami fibre, and even then the first German sheets failed the field test. Too new, too clean. The solution was grimly inventive. The linen was used, washed, and worked before pulping, because Britain's paper was made partly from rag that had lived a life. A dedicated mill was turned over to the problem, running trial after trial until the sheets crackled like Threadneedle Street's own. The British white fiver was not just a piece of paper, it was a fortress of Victorian engineering. The paper itself was made from linen rag with a distinctive feel, crisp, almost crackling, produced to a secret recipe. Within it ran a watermark of extraordinary subtlety, visible only when held to the light. The printing was intaglio, ink standing proud of the paper in microscopic ridges, and woven through the design sat traps, tiny deliberate imperfections, minute breaks in lines, a dot misplaced by a fraction of a millimeter, placed there so the bank's own inspectors could recognize their children and catch anyone else's. The first German attempts failed exactly as the bank intended. The paper felt wrong, the watermark blurred. The traps went unnoticed. A forgery that is nearly perfect is worthless, because a suspicious clerk with a magnifying glass is the whole of the defense. Then, in 1942, the operation passed to a man named Bernhard Krüger, an SS major with a background in textile engineering and a bureaucrat's patience. Krüger's insight was the one that gives this story its darkness and its strange humanity. The finest printers, engravers, and paper specialists in occupied Europe were already in German hands. They were in the camps. Krüger toured the concentration camps of the Reich with a recruiting list. Printers, lithographers, engravers, bankers, paper chemists, and forgers, professional criminals who had spent their lives copying other people's money. 142 men, most of them Jewish prisoners, were pulled from the general camps and delivered to 2 sealed barracks at Sachsenhausen, north of Berlin. Blocks 18 and 19, fenced off from the rest of the camp, windows painted over, entry forbidden even to most of the SS. Among them were men whose lives read like the story itself. Adolf Berger was a Slovak typographer arrested for printing false baptismal certificates to save Jews from deportation, a forger of mercy, now ordered to forge for the Reich. He survived to write the book that told the world. And in 1944, the operation acquired its strangest recruit of all, Salomon Smolianoff, the only professional criminal in the group, a Russian master counterfeiter whose pre-war forgeries of the very same British notes had been good enough to earn him files at Scotland Yard and a conviction in 3 countries. The SS had spent years hunting counterfeiters as criminals. Now they collected one as a consultant. Inside those barracks, the deal was never written down but understood by every man. Forge perfectly and live, fail and return to the machinery of death outside the fence. It was a bargain of exquisite cruelty, and the prisoners understood its arithmetic better than their captors. Work too slowly, and the SS had no reason to keep you. Finish too completely, and the SS had no reason to keep you either. The only survivable path was excellence without completion, indispensable today, unfinished tomorrow. Some of the men, Berger among them, later admitted to quiet sabotage at the margins. A delayed batch here, a technical difficulty carefully overstated there. Stretching the work was not laziness. It was the only clock they controlled. The prisoners of Block 19 solved the unsolvable piece by piece. The linen paper was reverse engineered down to its rag content and its feel. The watermark took months of trial. The solution required rebuilding the paper molds themselves. The intaglio plates were engraved by hand, line by line, under magnification. And the traps, the bank's secret imperfections, were found, catalogued, and faithfully copied, every deliberate flaw reproduced as lovingly as the design itself. Then came the aging. New money is suspicious money. So the prisoners dirtied their perfect notes, crumpled them, walked on them, passed them hand to hand around the barracks, pinned them through with bank pins as British clerks did, and penciled sums in the margins. The final touch was a masterpiece of psychology. The forgers sorted their own output into grades, the flawless notes reserved for the most dangerous work, the slightly imperfect for ordinary spending, and the failures burned. By 1943, the factory inside Block 19 was running like a mint. At its peak, it produced as many as 650,000 notes a month. Over its lifetime, Operation Bernhard printed roughly 9 million notes, £134 million. To measure that, it approached 10% of all the sterling banknotes then in circulation. The test came in 1943, and it remains one of the most audacious moments in the history of forgery. The Germans needed to know, would the notes survive expert inspection? So an agent walked into a Swiss bank with a bundle of Bernhard fivers and asked, with a straight face, for them to be checked. He had doubts, he said, about their authenticity. The Swiss examined them and pronounced them genuine. Not satisfied, the Germans pushed further. The notes were sent on for the Bank of England's own opinion. The bank looked at the finest forgeries ever made of its own currency and certified them as real. And yet the bombers never came. The original vision, blizzards of bank notes drifting down over English towns, died quietly for the most practical of reasons. By the time the notes were perfect, the Luftwaffe no longer commanded British skies. A weapon designed to fall from aircraft had outlived the aircraft. So the money found other work, and this is where the operation turned from a weapon into a machine. The SS began spending it. Forged sterling paid for intelligence networks across occupied Europe. It bought weapons, paid informants, and helped fund the commando raid that lifted Mussolini off his mountain prison in 1943. It flowed through money changers in Lisbon, Istanbul, Zurich, and Stockholm, wherever neutral markets asked no questions. The distribution itself became an industry with its own strange aristocracy. Its master was a Bavarian businessman named Friedrich Schwend, a money launderer of genius who ran the operation like a franchise from a requisitioned castle in northern Italy. Schwend's network of agents and sub-agents, smugglers, diplomats, black market brokers across a dozen countries, moved the forged notes into circulation and took their cut in real money. He was paid a third of the face value of everything he laundered. His salesmen carried sterling in false-bottomed suitcases across every neutral border in Europe. At the height of the operation, the SS was, in effect, running the largest money laundering business in history, with a criminal's commission structure and a government's printing press. Consider what Schwend's franchise actually was, because nothing like it has existed before or since. Sellers moved notes down a hierarchy of distributors, each layer buying sterling at a deeper discount and selling it up the chain closer to face value, the margin structure of a smuggling cartel applied to the currency of the enemy. Payment to the network came in genuine money, goods, gold, jewels, anything real. The SS was, quite literally, converting fiction into fact. Paper that cost pennies to print, exchanged across Europe for actual trucks, actual weapons, actual gold. Seen coldly, Operation Bernhard's second life was one of the most profitable business operations of the war. Profits conjured from a printing press and other people's belief. And notes flowed to stranger places still. Partisans in the Balkans were bought off with forged pounds. Border guards were bribed with them. There are accounts of the money being used to fund escape lines for Nazi officials as the war turned, the forgeries that had been made to destroy Britain ending their war, smuggling their makers' colleagues to safety. The most famous German spy of the war, a valet inside the British embassy in Ankara, codenamed Cicero, photographed British secrets and was paid some £300,000 for them. Almost every note of it was forged. The Germans paid their greatest spy in their own fake money and never told him. By 1944, Bernhard notes were so widespread in the Mediterranean that black market traders in some cities quoted two prices for sterling, one for notes above suspicion and a discount for notes that might have passed through German hands. The pound's reputation, the promise printed on every note, was being quietly poisoned exactly as the planners had intended, just more slowly and less visibly than a blizzard from the sky. London knew something was wrong. Warnings had reached the Bank of England within weeks of the war starting. The first tip came from a source in Switzerland before the operation had printed a single usable note. For years afterwards, the danger remained theoretical. Rumours, fragments, the occasional clumsy fake. Then, in 1943, a note came home to roost in the most ordinary way imaginable, a British bank, processing a deposit that traced back through a neutral country, flagged a fiver whose serial number told an impossible story. The bank's ledgers showed that note number already accounted for. Two identical serial numbers meant one thing. Somewhere, someone was printing pounds so well that only the bookkeeping could catch them. That was the true nightmare revealed. The forgeries could not be detected as objects. They could only be detected as arithmetic, duplicate serials, impossible dates, notes reported destroyed that walked in through the door. The defense of the pound retreated from the magnifying glass to the ledger. By 1943, the evidence was undeniable. Forgeries were surfacing that the bank's own experts could barely fault. In the bank's private ledgers, a special account was opened to track them. The staff who maintained it called the entries by a deliberately bland name, the German Notes, and the account was one of the most closely guarded secrets in Threadneedle Street. The response tells you how seriously they took it. The bank did something it had never done in 2.5 centuries. It retreated. It stopped issuing the great white notes above £5, the 10s, the 20s, the 50s, and pulled them from circulation. The pound's first line of defense had failed, so the bank simply abolished the battlefield. The public was told almost nothing. The full scale of the operation, the fact that an enemy state had achieved a near-perfect forgery of the national currency, stayed out of the newspapers during the war and stayed quiet for years after it. When a currency's defense is belief, you do not advertise that the belief was broken. And in the sealed barracks, the machine was already being aimed at a second target. In 1944, Krüger ordered the forgers to begin work on the United States dollar. The dollar was a different fortress, different paper, different printing, a different set of traps, and the prisoners, reading the war news in the quality of their rations, understood that this new impossible task was also a new lease on life. Smolianoff and a small team labored over the $100 bill for a year, solving it the way they had solved the fiver: paper, plates, patience. By early 1945, they had produced test sheets that the team judged good enough to pass. The full print run was scheduled. The Reich collapsed before the presses could turn. The dollar survived Operation Bernhard by a margin of weeks. Inside Sachsenhausen, the war was ending, and the prisoners of Blocks 18 and 19 understood exactly what their perfection had earned them. They were among the most dangerous witnesses in Europe. Men who knew how to destroy a currency could not be allowed to meet the Allies. In the spring of 1945, the operation was dismantled, the plates and papers crated, and the forgers loaded onto transports south, bound, they were certain, for execution. What saved them was the machinery of collapse itself. The Reich was disintegrating faster than its own orders could travel. Guards deserted. Transports stalled on broken railways. At the last camp, deep in Austria, the men assigned to liquidate the forgers ran out of time and ran for their own lives. In May 1945, American soldiers found the men of Operation Bernhard alive. Nearly every one of the 142 had survived the war inside the most secret room of the Reich. The evidence went into the lake. Crates of notes, plates, and records were sunk in Lake Toplitz, deep in the Austrian Alps, a lake chosen with care. Over 100 meters deep, its lower waters starved of oxygen, so that whatever sank would neither rot nor surface. The lake kept its secret badly, and everyone who went looking found more story than treasure. In 1959, the German magazine Stern quietly funded a diving expedition. Out of the black water came 15 crates of sodden, perfect fivers, and something far more dangerous, the operation's own ledgers, sodden but legible, recording serial runs and transactions, naming names that several comfortably living ex-SS men very much preferred unnamed. The magazine's scoop rattled half of Europe, and the whispers began that other crates held other lists. The lake began to collect legends and then bodies. In 1963, a 19-year-old diver on an unauthorized treasure hunt died in the dark water. The expedition behind it traced back to men with wartime pasts, and Austria banned diving in Toplitz outright. The bans never quite held. Decade after decade, the expeditions returned. Sonar sweeps, submersibles, television-funded searches. In 2000, an American team with a research submarine spent weeks on the bottom and came up with more crates of notes, the paper preserved almost perfectly by the lake's oxygen-starved depths, as if the operation had closed the day before. Treasure hunters still petition to dive it today, chasing gold that was never there. The paper was the treasure, and the paper was the weapon. The notes that never sank had their own strange afterlife. For years after the war, Bernhard fivers kept surfacing in the world's money, in bank deposits, in market stalls, in bureaux de change from Cairo to Buenos Aires, and the Bank of England quietly absorbed the blow, withdrawing suspect notes as they appeared and destroying them, unwilling to punish whoever happened to be holding the parcel when the music stopped. A few specimens were kept, catalogued, and locked away. Today they sit in the bank's own museum, the finest forgeries ever made, preserved by their victim as a professional compliment. And the men walked into their endings. Krüger passed through 2 post-war tribunals, and at both, the testimony that shielded him came from his own former prisoners, men with every reason to hate the SS, telling the plain truth that his factory had been the reason they lived. Whatever one makes of that arithmetic, the tribunals accepted it. He gave a single television interview late in life, unrepentant and precise, the bureaucrat to the end. The fates of the men complete the ledger. Friedrich Schwend, the money launderer, slipped to South America and ran his talents for hire for decades before dying poor. The middleman's fortune, like his merchandise, proved counterfeit. Bernhard Krüger, the operation's architect, was held, questioned, and never prosecuted. Counterfeiting an enemy's currency in wartime, it turned out, fitted no article of the war crimes charters, and several of his former prisoners testified, truthfully, that his factory had kept them alive. He died in 1989, having spent part of his later career with no apparent sense of irony working for a paper company. Salomon Smolianoff, the master forger, emigrated to South America and finished his days making toys. and Adolf Berger spent half a century telling the story. His memoir became the Austrian film The Counterfeiters, which in 2008 won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film and put Block 19 on the world's screens. Count the cost, and the strange verdict of Operation Bernhard emerges. As a weapon, it failed. The pound did not collapse, and the blizzard of banknotes never fell. As a forgery, it was the most successful in history. 9 million notes pronounced genuine by their own victim. And as an attack on trust, it left a mark that outlasted the war by a generation. The Bank of England did not put a £10 note back into circulation until 1964, 19 years after the war ended. For 2 decades, the largest banknote in Britain was the fiver, and the reason lay at the bottom of an Austrian lake. The white fiver itself, the elegant Victorian promise that had circulated for generations, was retired in 1957, replaced by a smaller, more defensible design. The forgers of Block 19 had not destroyed the pound. They had destroyed the pound's innocence. And here is the uncomfortable mirror that completes the story. Britain knew this weapon intimately because Britain had used it. During the American Revolution, British forces counterfeited the continental dollar on an industrial scale, advertising in New York newspapers for paper and printers, shipping forged notes into the rebel colonies by the trunkload. The Continental collapsed. Not worth a Continental entered the language, and though bad rebel finance did most of the killing, London's forgeries helped dig the grave. A century before that, revolutionary France's assignats were forged from British soil with the government's knowledge. Napoleon, in his turn, forged Russian rubles and Austrian notes for his campaigns. Currency warfare was not a Nazi invention. It is as old as paper money itself, a standing temptation for any power at war with a country whose money is made of promises. What Operation Bernhard added was only scale and perfection. The first time the weapon was built on a production line aimed at the strongest currency on Earth, and made so well that the victim certified the ammunition. The Bank of England understood that mirror perfectly, which may be the deepest reason the whole affair stayed so quiet for so long. There are attacks a central bank does not discuss, partly because discussing them teaches the method, and partly because the method has old fingerprints on it. So, what does Operation Bernhard teach, nearly a century on? That money is a promise, and promises can be attacked. That the real defense of a currency was never the watermark or the paper, those were copied, but the willingness of its institutions to retreat, adapt, and absorb the blow in silence. That the same machinery can print value or destroy it, depending only on whose hands hold the plates, and that the most effective financial weapons are the ones nobody sees working. The pound was under industrial attack for 5 years, and the quietness of the defense was the defense. Every banknote in your pocket still carries the same promise the white fiver carried. It works because you never have to think about it. In 1945, at the bottom of an Alpine lake lay 134 million reasons to think about it. Sources for this account include the Bank of England's released wartime records on forgery, post-war interrogation records, the published memoir of Sachsenhausen forger Adolf Berger, the recovered Toplitz ledgers and expedition records, and the documented history of the Schwend distribution network.